With Kong Skull Island coming out in March and leaked photos of new supposed foes, the community is still scratching their heads as to who Kong will face in this upcoming film. However, today, I'm going to give an explanation as to why I think that this foe might be one of the most obscure references in recent kaiju media. Hey, welcome back guys, and today I'm going to be discussing whether or not Ga and the Death Runners will be appearing in Kong Skull Island. Well, a lot of people would know what Ga or the Death Runners are. However, they appeared in the 2004 comic run of Kong, King of Skull Island. Now, Ga specifically is a large dromaeosaurus, and the Death Runners are relatively large evolved dromaeosaurus as well. They're not specifically dromaeosauruses, however, they are evolved forms of that type of dinosaur. And their intelligence is quite advanced, as they display hunting patterns similar to that of early primitive humans. And that is shown throughout the book, and they become a major antagonist to the humans as well as to Kong. And the story of Kong, King of Skull Island is sort of a prequel to King Kong itself, as we see Kong's early life, and Ga is one of the first creatures that Kong fights. And Ga, as a character, if they were to bring back Ga and make Ga the primary antagonist of Kong Skull Island, there are quite a few reasons as to why it would make sense, and it would actually be a pretty good film because of that. Now, starting off, Ga is a large dromaeosaurus, and because of that, you have a lot of liberties with the design and how you'd want the design to look, as you can make it more streamlined instead of bulky with small arms like a typical T-Rex or a theropod that most people see Kong fight. So because of that, its design would probably be very similar to the Indominus Rex from Jurassic World, or maybe similar to the Velociraptors with more spines, similar to probably this drawing right here. This is a rendition of Ga. This is not from the comic itself. However, this is what most artists do when they try to up the design of Ga, as the design itself isn't really all that amazing. However, I think this design right here is a pretty cool design for Ga, but it stays true to the original comic. Now, another big reason why Ga would be a really good antagonist for Kong is because Ga and the Death Runners killed Kong's parents, as well as wiped out a majority of the Kong species, if you want to call it that. The big species of ape that King Kong is a part of, Ga and the Death Runners wiped out most of them on Skull Island. And because of that, there's a lot of motivation for Kong to fight Ga, as well as it gives the audience a reason to root for Kong, besides from just saying, oh yeah, it's King Kong, let's root for King Kong. However, we all know that Kong's going to be fighting Godzilla soon, so it gives people a reason to be like, oh hey, let's root for Kong now. And then when he fights Godzilla, we root for Godzilla, because we all know Godzilla's gonna win. Go Godzilla. But yeah, I mean, if they go into like a backstory of that, or we see traces of that, as we do see a Kong skeleton, I don't know if like the reason there's not much of those bones in some of the shots we see of the people, that's just because it's erosion or things have been moving the bones. And I don't see any of the bones really cracked necessarily. However, this could be a sign that Ga's on the island and had killed some of the other primates on the island. And again, that would be a good motivation for Kong to fight Ga as well as the Death Runners. However, it'd also give the audience a reason to root for Kong even more. Another thing is that the Death Runners, being larger dromaeosaurs, pose a threat to the humans on the island. And because of that, it's similar to how the Venatosaurus during the Brontosaurus stampede in the 2005 Peter Jackson rendition of King Kong were a threat to the humans, because they being smaller, they're not like giant things that are going to eat up the people. Like if they're going to die by these things, it's going to be a very brutal and painful death. It's not going to be a one and done, eaten and gone thing. Like it's going to be brutal. Like Preston, I believe, was the one who was killed in the 2005 King Kong. Like his death, like we hear him screaming as well as being dragged down there. It was pretty brutal, and I think if we see some of these characters that we see get attached to killed by the Death Runners in gruesome ways, as we know their intelligence is much higher, similar to that of probably the Jurassic Park Velociraptors, and probably even surpassing them, that we could see something very tribal and very brutal coming from the Death Runners in terms of killing one of these characters. And that again, it makes the audience root for the humans even more, like let's go kill these like abominations, as well as for the characters themselves. It motivates them to be like, yo, we need to get off this island, or we really need to kill these guys, like for our buddies and stuff. That was obviously the military, so yeah, go military. And one of the last things that's really interesting is Ga was the original god of Skull Island. The natives on Skull Island worshipped Ga before they started worshipping Kong. And because this is a prequel, like not exactly a prequel, but this ignores King Kong and this is just Kong Skull Island, I think that before we see Kong become King of Skull Island, because it's just Kong Skull Island, that the titles seem very similar. Like originally, Kong King of Skull Island and Kong Skull Island, like their titles just seem so close. They could be following a similar process in terms of how Kong is going to become King Kong. But yeah, those are the main things. God has opportunities for really good design. It motivates the audience to root for Kong, as God in the established lore of God had already killed Kong's parents as well as other members of his species. The Death Runners, being a smaller adversary as opposed to God, will pose a bigger threat and more brutal threat to the humans. And Ga was the original god of the island, and by killing Ga, it would make Kong the new king and god of the island and make him look like a more viable threat to Godzilla. As currently, we know Kong is going to be 100 feet tall, as they say he's going to be a 100-foot tall ape. However, as we can see in the shot right here, it says adolescent, if you can read that. These monarch notes state that Kong is an adolescent, so we don't know how big Kong is going to get. However, if he's 100 feet tall and he's adolescent now, he's going to get really big, and it's going to get really interesting to see how Kong fights now as opposed to how he'll fight against Godzilla when he's much bigger. And another thing is that if a Toho monster, although a lot of people want to see Toho monsters fight Kong, if the god is the antagonist against Kong, if the god dies, it's just a new creature that's kind of re-added to the kaiju mythos and kind of brought back into the spotlight as a entry in the cinematic universe. And it spares characters like Rodan, Baragon, Anguirus, Titanosaurus, Gorosaurus from being killed in the film, because a lot of people have been stating that they want to see these characters in the film, but they don't want them to die. And usually in King Kong films, one character, usually the dinosaur or the antagonist that Kong fights, most likely dies, and in most cases does. Like the original T-Rex from 33 died, the Python from one of the remakes died, the Plesiosaur died, Pterosaur died, the Statosauruses, all of them except for one that was caught in the vines, all died. So again, you kind of like know how a King Kong film's going to be in terms of like pacing or action or results. However, I don't think any of us kaiju fans want to see a big name kaiju, even if it's a more obscure kaiju like Titanosaurus or Baragon. We don't want to see them get killed because we want to see them appear in the cinematic universe later on. And I will be doing another video to be talking about why Toho monsters might appear, and I will play devil's advocate. This is one side to the argument as to why we're not going to see Toho monsters. However, I will give another side as to why we'll see Toho monsters. But I think that I personally would rather see Ga than a Toho monster because of the fact that usually Kong foes die, and I'd rather see Ga kick the bucket than a Toho monster kick the bucket. And that's pretty much the end of the video. I hope you guys liked it, and stay tuned for more Kong Skull Island speculation. See you guys.